And welcome to the debut edition of The Panel, where we discuss what's hot, what's not, and the direction that the collectible marketplaces are going. I'm Bram Weinstein, and here's our expert panelists on this debut edition. Jesse Craig, Director of Business Development, PWCC Marketplace. Hey, Jesse, how are you?
Good, Bram. How are you?
I'm good. And Nick Sapero, Independent Memorabilia Consultant. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Bram.
All right, our show is going to consist of three big topics. Let's get to it. Here's number one. The man who's become the face of baseball, at least recently, Shohei Ohtani, first ever All-Star to hit and pitch in the game, leading the bigs in home runs, in all likelihood the MVP this year in Major League Baseball, and probably the face of the game. Don't forget he's Japanese global icon to go along with all of it. So this feels like, in the collectible market space, to the moon, right? Jesse, what are you seeing with his collectibles?
Well, I mean, as a baseball fan, I love it. We haven't seen somebody do what Ohtani's doing since Babe Ruth. So it's really exciting for the game, and he's bringing a ton of attention back to baseball, in my opinion. And he's an international icon. I mean, he's Japanese, so you get the international mix in there. From an investment perspective, though, 27 years old, he pitches, he hits. So there's a big injury concern in my opinion. It's not the old days back when Babe Ruth, a lot of people had beer guts, and John Daly said it best, you can't pull fat. So, these athletes today they're unbelievably in shape, and they work hard at their craft, and I think that pushes their body to the limits. And so having someone not only focus on being an incredible hitter, but I mean the guy has to go and throw 100. I think it's just could take a big toll on his body, and he's already been injured a few times and missed a lot of games. So the injury concern from an investment perspective, that would be my fear. It can really affect the value of his cards.
So you're expecting at some point for him to make a choice and become a hitter, a position player, because the injury likelihood of being a pitcher clearly is much higher than being a position player.
Correct. Yeah, and I think the Angels actually probably need to make that decision for him, because I'm sure he'll want to do both, right? But I think they need to tell him to do one or the other. And then on top of all that, he's on a team with Mike Trout, and while Mike Trout is Captain America and his cards have done really well, he still hasn't won, and they're in an organization that has had problem winning. And for your cards as an investment to get to the next level, you got to win. And I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon for the Angels.
All right, Nick, what do you see for the Ohtani market?
I see short-term success. I think long-term, the long-term success is going to come based off him as a hitter, not a pitcher. I think if he stays the course and both bats and pitches, I think it's going to be one of those things where he's bound to get hurt, as Jesse was saying. With pitchers, it's just so variable. That's why they're tough investments to make in the market. But I think what he's doing is remarkable. But at the same rate, you talk about his age, 27. Babe Ruth had 27, had 200 home runs. So ultimately, he only has about 50 right now, which, this is his first, I'd say, real season. First is going to be his first real full season. So it'll be a historic season for him. But if that's going to relay, let's say, 10 years from now, we'll see. And as athletes develop too, every year we see something remarkable athlete-wise that really changes the market. So what's hot today maybe won't be hot in 5 years, 10 years. You never know.
I didn't know 27 was old. You're making a case that that's old.
I mean, I'm 28 and I consider myself a grandpa. So, that's, Yeah, I think with baseball in general, I think the investability comes at that 2022 range in age. That's where kind of you see the bright spot guys getting called up when they're 19, 20 years old, and they're the investable guys, and they need to continue that success for 10, 15 years to really command market. That's why Trout is such a remarkable investment for what he does. Night in and night out, the guy, he performs. The only thing he hasn't done is won, as Jesse pointed out. But I think if he does win, it just puts him in the same respect as potentially a Mickey Mantle. Just a generational talent that everybody within the time period watching him will always remember.
All right, so you're saying the better investments, the younger player, the Bryce Harper, the Mike Trout, Tatis now, maybe Juan Soto, those players, because there's more time to potentially set all-time records and have a longer career. But let me ask it this way then, Jesse. Kurt Warner came up late in the NFL, had as good a run as anybody ever for a very short period of time. In the end, he won a Super Bowl, has legendary status, and is in the Hall of Fame, but he's not going to break any records. In Ohtani's case, is there value long term if he is, let's say, best player in the game for a 4 or 5 year period?
Well, I think that's a great point. I mean, use Kurt Warner as an example, right? Like his cards aren't worth anything. So, I mean, there's your sign right there. Now, look, if you believe that Ohtani can perform the way he is for 10 plus years, like, I mean, seeing a 37-year-old throw 100, it probably isn't going to happen. So, if he can keep hitting though, and they have him quit pitching, look, there is some investment potential with his cards, but I just think, in my opinion, the risk outweighs the reward.
And Nick, let's just bring in one final thought on this. The international aspect of it, does that change his value long-term, being that he is of Japanese descent and could have more interest globally than some other athletes here?
I think that's a fair point. But if you look at the good thing about Ohtani is he's a power hitter. He's hitting home runs, unlike, let's say, an Ichiro, for example, where his market really hasn't taken off drastically to the player that he was. Ichiro to me is one of the greatest players I've seen in my generation from a hitting perspective, but he wasn't a power hitter. Ohtani could change that landscape with him being a power hitter, and everybody wants to see the long ball. Of course, everybody pays for the long ball, but I just think that he just needs success for 10 years to really command even a global investment. It's tough for me. It's one of those tough things where we could be sitting, we could be looking at this today and being like, yeah, we were wrong. We were clearly wrong, but you never know. I'd rather play the safer card and say that, we're probably right in this case.
Yeah, a couple World Series MVPs, maybe a AL MVP. We'll see how it plays out long term. All right, topic number 2. NFL training camps are opening as we speak. Odds-on favorite for the Super Bowl right now. It's a rematch. Both Kansas City and Tampa Bay are the favorites, respectively, in the AFC and the NFC. Let's see with Aaron Rodgers. He has not committed to coming back to Green Bay. And of all places, Cleveland is the sharp pick right now to make a really, really deep run this year. As we look at the collectible market in the NFL for 2021, Nick, let's start with you. Who are you bullish on? Who are you watching?
I'm watching a couple of the older guys. I think if Aaron Rodgers plays, it'll be a very interesting if he plays. To me, I think he's always one of those talents that going to be top 3 for MVP voting. But we'll see what happens with him. I think an underrated play for me is Matthew Stafford. I think Stafford with the Rams is in a good situation finally. I think he always puts up numbers. He has the weapons behind him. We'll just see if that really pans out. I think the obvious choices, if you're going with some of the other guys, I think the kind of Josh Allens of the world and the Baker Mayfields are sound investments, but it's very variable to where they always just come to disappoint in the end. So I'm sorry I didn't fit in any Redskins for you, Bram, but there's nobody there except for Chase Young, and I'm just not investing in a defensive player at this point.
We here in Washington have a jar that goes to charity every time somebody uses the R word. So you owe us $20 now to put that in there.
Oh, I'm sorry. The right. Washington football team.
That's right.
My apologies.
That's right. And secondarily, Chase Young will be the best defensive player in football within the next 2 to 3 years. Yes, I'm biased, but I also think that is true. So watch out for that. And you'll have to tell me whether there's a major value on that in the marketplace for defensive players to do that. Jesse, let me get just your broad view of this. Who are you watching and who are you investing in here as training camp opens in the NFL?
Well, admittingly, I'm a risk-adverse guy, so I'm going to take the sure things. I'm probably going to still bet on Brady and Mahomes. Those are guys that I still value highly. The quarterback landscape in the league is really interesting. There's a lot of young talent and a lot of unknowns. I mean, you have a lot of guys betting heavy on Herbert, and I'm an Oregon Duck alum, so I love me some Herbs. But he he's not on a great team. So that would concern me from a investment perspective. You look at Mahomes, he got put in a great situation, great coach, great team, and obviously he's an amazing talent, and that all creates the value that you see in his trading cards. So, you're going to be taking a gamble, whether it's Burrow, Tua, Herbert, who else do we have?
Trevor
Mayfield
Lawrence is coming in this year.
Trevor Lawrence,
Zach Wilson is coming in
Zach
this year.
Wilson,
Justin Fields, yes.
It's an unbelievably young quarterback crew in the NFL that's leading the way. So I think there's almost too many unknowns, and it's really high risk, high reward if you bet on the right guy and win or lose.
Nick, let me ask about a few names that were brought up here. In your experience with, let's say, Aaron Rodgers, and let's just say this standoff ends in him getting traded somewhere else. We've seen this with some first ballot Hall of Fame types like Peyton Manning late in his career, ended up playing in Denver, ended up winning a Super Bowl. How does that kind of affect the investment in the marketplace if he were to go somewhere else and potentially win somewhere else?
I think I think it's kind of twofold, because it's one of those things where you're going to garner more of a market share because you're going to a new market. So that new market's automatically going to be interested in investing in that quarterback. And then secondly, it adds to if he wins, it adds to his legacy. So his overall market's going to go up as well. So, for a guy like Rodgers, if he goes someplace and wins, I just think it just adds so much more to his values. I don't think his values are really that strong as compared to what he's done over the course of his career. And I think he'll go down as probably a top 3 quarterback, or if not already a top 3 quarterback of all time. To me, he already has a Super Bowl ring. He already has, MVPs. So, to me, I like the Rodgers play. And building off Jesse's point, which Jesse went a little bit more conservative, I really don't think Mahomes is a very conservative investment just based off the prices that you're seeing. I think the prices are very strong. I mean, for that, I'd rather invest in Brady at those levels, just because Mahomes has so much more to live up to, as opposed to, investing in Tom Brady, where he already has the championships. He already has the MVPs. So to me, it's one of those things where, and Brady could win this year again. So yeah, I'm not ruling Brady out. I just think Mahomes it could be, it seems like a sure bet investment, but it's a little bit risky in my opinion.
What's really funny about this is going back to the Ohtani point, because he's kind of starting this track towards trying to make history, probably a little too late in his sport to catch some of these legends, at least numbers wise. If you look at where Mahomes is tracking at his age, if he were to stay healthy, he is tracking towards these types of numbers that Drew Brees, Tom Brady has. Will he catch him in rings and championships? That's kind of hard to fathom at this point, but he is at least going in that direction where he's young enough, good enough, and in the right situation where he could have astounding numbers by the end, right, Jesse?
Absolutely. And I just want to comment on Nick's Rodgers top 3 all time. Really? Rodgers? I mean, what about this guy named Joe Montana?
Hey, you know where some of my money lies, so I got to prop up some of the Aaron Rodgers plays.
Yeah, I hear you.
Last one on the quarterbacks, Jesse. I just want you to weigh in on this, because you had mentioned all the young guys that are out there, and there are a couple that I think are of note here, and they were mentioned. One was mentioned earlier, Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, where they're in very, very good situations, but they haven't gotten over the top. They haven't won yet, and both teams have not made a decision yet on a 5th-year option, which means their futures are semi in doubt with where they would go, and it looks like that their teams are saying out loud they want to see them go a little bit farther in the playoffs, both of them. As you kind of look at them as investments this year, how do you kind of view Mayfield and Lamar Jackson?
Well, they're definitely in better positions with their team having talent. So I would bet on them more than I would a younger quarterback, a second year or first year player. And hey, contract years, guys got to perform. And usually you get the best out of them in a contract year because it's pay to play. So I love Lamar. I think that, he's one of the greatest athletes we've ever seen play in the NFL. The guy's incredible. And Baker's got a great team around him. Their defense is really solid. Their offense has a lot of weapons. So, they could make a run as well. So from a semi-risky investment, I think both of those guys have some good upside.
Okay. All right, let's get to topic number 3. Speaking of history, it will be made in Tokyo, albeit under very unusual circumstances with COVID-19, lack of fans, and athletes that are going to have to deal with all of the issues in and around it as long as they can stay healthy and perform. The Tokyo Games are starting this weekend. Simone Biles is one of the people we'll be watching very closely, may cement herself as best gymnast ever in Tokyo. The U.S. hoops team, the U.S. women's national soccer team have had really bumpy starts here in exhibition play as they kind of head into Olympic play, so that's strange. Nick, historically, the Olympic Games, does it move the needle in the collectible market?
I think for the year, it does. I think maybe not for basketball, but I think probably for sports like swimming, like where Michael Phelps like solidifies like he's the greatest swimmer ever, or where Simone Biles comes out and could solidify herself as the greatest gymnast ever. I think overall, yes, it does. But for basketball, probably not. And especially if they could only hurt their market by playing, and potentially even hurt their market even more if they get injured. So that's a tough one for me. But I think for other sports, it gives recognition to other sports, and it also creates investability within other sports. Most people are seeing that right now in the market. The market's shifting to being all sports are investable, not just basketball, not just football or baseball, but you could invest in all sports. So I think the Olympics is a perfect outlet and provides a perfect outlet to where you could invest in what you're interested in. Yes, certain market caps are very different in it. So a market cap investing in the swimming card is going to be much different than a basketball card. But ultimately, there is mass appeal, and it creates such viewership that I think there is a long-term investability play in it.
Certainly bubble viewership. Everyone pays attention to a lot of these sports for about 4 weeks, and then they go away for 4 years. Jesse, where are you on the Olympics and whether it moves the needle or not?
Yeah, I think Nick actually hit a nail on the head. Basketball, I don't think it moves the needle up at all. It can only hurt it. But for these other sports that don't get the stage that they get during the Olympics, they kind of disappear for the majority of the general public for 4 years. So it's their time to shine, and so the short-term effect on their cards is going to be greater than the long-term. I would see a spike with excitement after for the lack of Simone Biles cards that there are, but you would see a little spike in those if she does well. But then the interest is going to wane on those because they're just not in your face all the time like some of these guys in the NBA are in the 4 major sports. So that's where, from an investment perspective, with the Olympics, you just don't have the eyeballs on them for the majority of these Olympic sports throughout the year, every year, and that really hurts the investability of it.
Nick, let me ask you a little bit about NFTs here for a moment. In this specific space, if you think that there is an opportunity, as I see an opportunity here, because of the specificity of what they do, the uniqueness of what they do, and how scarce this becomes because people aren't paying much attention to it within 4 years. Do you see this kind of new digital marketplace being a place where the Olympians can kind of cash in?
I think so. I think for sure if I'm an Olympian athlete, I'm getting all potentially NFTs created. I'm getting trading card deals. I'm trying to do as much as I can. Your time to capitalize is during the Olympics for those sports. I mean, you're really not going to see too much people getting excited about a track and field event that's on NBC Sports at like 2:00 on a Sunday. You're just not. So I think it's the same with swimming, it's the same with gymnastics. It's tailored to a very specific audience that that doesn't necessarily see it day in and day out. So when you don't see it day in and day out, I think you're not gonna command a whole lot of market share on it. So the Olympics is their platform. The Olympics is the time to cash out, and they may not even qualify the next year. So that's another thing. The following year they may not even be competing in those games, so they may not even be relevant. So if I'm an Olympic athlete, I'm trying to cash in.
Yeah, it is time to do so. All right, we close each show here with a final word, and we're going to focus this final word on the National Sports Collectors Convention, which begins next week. And it's the first major live convention that will take place since the pandemic start a little over a year ago. And I'll ask you and start with you, Jesse, what's the impact of that?
I think the impact's huge. We as an industry have been meeting a lot of people online via social, email, whatever it may be. We've never had the pleasure of meeting in person. A lot of these massive collections, a lot of people haven't seen, and they're going to be on display at the show. So the buzz is real. I think it's going to be a bit of a zoo in a good way, but it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to meeting some people in person and shaking some hands.
All right, Nick, final word on the National. What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to getting Jesse Craig's autograph Saturday at the booth that he's signing from 2 to 3 o'clock. But aside from that, now I'm looking at meeting, all the new people that came into the hobby. I think, giving them, pretty much a concrete basis to the Nationals always been around. It's one of those things where, a lot of people came into the hobby 2 years ago or during the pandemic where they didn't experience card shows in the same fashion. And this is the biggest card show. So it's kind of one of those things where this has been around forever. It's been around a very long time. And it's a spectacle that I think everybody that invests in sports cards should at least experience once. It's one of those things where you're going to meet everybody's in the room, and even if the cards aren't even for sale, just seeing some of the stuff that's in the room is just absolutely remarkable.
That's quite a coming out this year for 2021. All right, that will do it for the debut episode of The Panel. For Nick Sapero, Jesse Craig, I'm Bram Weinstein. We'll see you next week.